We are moving into a new theme this month, and that is the compassion connection, the compassion connection, the compassion connection. And you can say it along with me. Can you believe it's April already? Another month has passed, and we are into this new month of April 2022. And this is the fourth month of this year. It's just unbelievable how fast time is passing. And yet it is, whether we believe it or not. And so let's just take a deep breath as we just move into this month of exploring the compassion connection. And I call it the compassion connection because compassion is connected to everything. It's connected to every aspect of our lives. It's connected to every aspect of our being. Compassion is. Compassion is an emotional response to a perceived suffering, an emotional response to a perceived suffering, and an authentic desire to relieve that suffering. It's the emotional response we have to perceived suffering and an authentic desire to relieve that suffering. And I say authentic desire because when we are authentically seeking to relieve suffering, we aren't seeking anything in return. We aren't expecting anything in return. And so just knowing that we perceive suffering and we want to do something about it, we want to relieve that suffering. That's what compassion is all about. And we usually think about suffering as something that we see like in war-torn areas, like in Ukraine and other places now, or when there is some natural disaster or something and people are suffering from that. But there's so much more suffering that's happening in our world today. And we'll talk about that just as I go along. But I want to just share with you the difference between compassion and empathy. Empathy is the emotional response that we have when we experience another person's feeling. Empathy is an experience of another person's feeling. For instance, when we tear up when somebody is sad, or when someone's crying and we tear up also. Compassion and empathy are instinctive in individuals, in humans, and in animals. And for those of us who have, those of you, I don't have any longer, but those of you who have animal companions, you know that how natural it is for animals to be compassionate with each other. If there is something, if one is injured or one is sick or one is hurting in some way, the other ones gather around to console them, to make them feel better, to nudge them, to nurture them in some way, to be with them in some way. And I remember when I did have little grand dogs, Yogi and Sweet Pea, if something happened to one of them, if one of them wasn't feeling well, the other one was right there, just watching. Sweet Pea was the nurturer, so he was always the one who was nudging Yogi and really trying to make him feel better. Yogi was more macho. He didn't do very much of that, but he would hover over Sweet Pea whenever he wasn't feeling well or if something was going on with him. And so that's that natural instinct that we have to really want to alleviate the suffering, whatever it is, to make it better. As the song says, to help somebody, to help out along the way, to relieve that suffering. The Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu wrote a book together in the last couple of years, the Book of Joy. And in that book, they talk about about compassion. And the Dalai Lama was distinguishing compassion from empathy. And he was saying that, imagine a rock crushing somebody and the person being crushed under this rock. And empathy would be going to crawl under the rock so that you make sure you feel what they're feeling. Compassion would be trying to move the rock away from them. And so I laughed when I read that because you could just imagine the Dalai Lama with his wonderful sense of humor saying that, and chuckling as he said that crawling under the rock to see what the other person is feeling is what empathy is, and compassion is wanting to remove the rock, to relieve the suffering. And so just think about it like that that's what compassion is. It's really wanting to relieve suffering, wanting to really be in a place of helping someone, of helping others. It's a more other-centered virtue, and it's more. It isn't self-centered. When we are in that place of self-centeredness, when we're thinking only of ourselves, then it makes us more fearful. It makes us more untrusting. It makes us more separate or feeling more separate from others because we're thinking of ourselves. And oftentimes people shy away from compassion for that very reason, because they don't want to think of others. They want to think about themselves. They want to feel protected. They want to feel secure. There's something in security for people sometimes in being to themselves and not reaching out or not being open to others. And that is not that heart-centered place that we want to be for compassion, for connection. And compassion is about connection and caring. Ernest Holmes says that compassion is love in action. That is love in action. And that connection and caring come together to bring us together in a mutual understanding and a unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. It brings us together. He says that they're the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in a unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Think about that. There's a unified attempt that's happening in compassion and caring, where we are trying to and seeking to uncover the divinity in each other. That is powerful. Just think about it. When we are trying to uncover the divinity in each other, we recognize that there is a divinity in each one of us. There is divinity in each one of us. And when we are caring, when we are connected, we are seeking to uncover that in each other. And we can only do that when we have an open heart. We can only do that when we're coming from a place of love. We can only do that when we are seeking to be more loving in our hearts, as the reading said, when we are seeking to really let go of those things that would hold us back, let go of those things that would keep us from being connected with each other, let go of those things that would keep us from really appreciating and understanding our oneness and being willing to live in that place of oneness, being willing to live from that place of oneness. Oftentimes people don't practice compassion because they feel like they set themselves up to be vulnerable. They set themselves up to be open. They set themselves up to be hurt in some way, or something can be taken away from them. That's that sense of separation again. Oftentimes people don't practice compassion because they feel that they may be obligated in some way, that somebody may expect something in return from them if they are practicing compassion. And that's not the case. That's not the case. We just give from that place of an open heart. We give from that place of recognizing our connectedness to each other. We give from that place of recognizing that we are all a part of the one, that we are each made in the image and likeness and out of pure spirit itself. When we recognize that, then we can act from that place. We can act from that place of connection. We can act from that place of caring. We can act from that place of relieving the suffering of another. Bishop Tutu talked about that concept of being made in the image and likeness and out of God. And he referred to himself as a God carrier. As a God carrier. I love that expression, as a God carrier. And when we recognize that we are made in the image and likeness and out of God, then we are all God carriers, because God is right where we are always. We are one with that one, and that one that is God always. And so wherever we are carrying that with us. That one is with us. And so when we act from that place, then we can act from an open heart. We can act from a place of letting go of our fears of being hurt, letting go of our fears of being vulnerable, letting go of our fears of being judged, letting go of our need to compete, letting go of all those things that we hold on to. We let go of all those things that we hold on to, and then we can come from that place of open-heartedness and willingness to really reach out and help someone else, reach out and really practice that caring, really practice that sharing of ourselves, really practice that sharing of our connection with each other and our connection with the all that is. That's what we do when we're practicing compassion. You know, there's been a lot of research lately in recent years on compassion and the effects that it has on our bodies. There's a whole connection between that compassionate mind and that healthy body. There's a lot of research of what's happening to our bodies when we are practicing compassion. That there are that the centers of our brain that are the pleasure centers of our brain light up when we are giving, rather than much more so than when we are receiving. That those centers light up when we, there was one study that showed that when people see donations being made to charity or donations being made to others, that those pleasure centers light up just like the people are receiving the donations themselves. That when we see good happening, when we see compassion being practiced, then we are inspired by that. Our brains react to that. Our entire being reacts to that, just as though it's happening for us. There was another study where there were two groups of people taken, and each group was given a certain amount of money, and one group received money and the other group was giving money to others. The ones who were giving money, the pleasure centers lit up much more than the ones who were receiving the money. The ones who were giving were lighting up much more than the ones receiving. And that takes us back to that place of really wanting to reach out, really wanting to connect, really wanting to help, really wanting to be in a place of oneness. And it shows us with these studies, it shows us how all of these spiritual principles that we talk about, all the ones that we practice, are all connected. Because we get the same kinds of pleasure center reactions and responses when we're dealing with gratitude, when we're dealing with giving, when we're dealing with generosity, when we're dealing with compassion, when we're dealing with love, when we're dealing with joy. All of the gifts of the Spirit create the same kinds of responses in our bodies. And so the connection between our bodies, our minds, our spirit, it's just so evident that it's been known in spiritual communities forever. And it's now coming to be known in scientific communities, because it's able to be proved in the scientific community as well. And so I just think it's exciting to think about the fact that compassion, that one thing that is so powerful and so simple. It seems to be so simple. It may not always be easy, but it is very simple to practice compassion, to choose compassion. It's just exciting to know that it has a real meaningful effect, a real powerful effect on our bodies, our minds, our spirits. And so let's just take a breath together. I'm just going to invite you to just really think about how easy it is to practice compassion, as I said, when we see things happening in the world where we see people are hurting, when we see people are hungry, when we see the effects of the ravages of war and of storms and of natural disasters. But how easy is it for you to practice compassion in your own neighborhood, in your own family, in your own personal relationships? How easy is it to practice compassion there? Because, suffering doesn't just have to be physical suffering. Suffering also shows up in the form of anger, or anger shows up as a result of suffering, of some type of suffering that's happening, or blame, or judgment, or fear. Those are the ways. And when we see people, when we come in contact with people who are acting out, how are we able to practice compassion then? How are we able to practice compassion rather than judgment? Because initially, when we see people acting out, when we see people angry, when we see people blaming, when we see people doing whatever that is some behavior that's sort of untoward, when we see that, how often do we go to compassion before we go to judgment? How often do we go to compassion before we go to blame? How often do we go to compassion before we go to some finger pointing type of thing? And when it's our own behavior, how often are we able to practice self-compassion? Because we can hold ourselves to such high standards sometimes. We can get into that whole mode of achievement and everything that we think that we are is determined by what we have achieved. Then so when we fall short or when we make mistakes, then there's a time that we are not compassionate with ourselves. There's a time that we're blaming. There's a time that we're shaming. There's a time that we are belittling to ourselves. And so it's just so important to keep our hearts open, to be more loving in our hearts to ourselves, as well as being more loving in our hearts to others. And so I'm inviting you today to just really look at three things. Look at where in your life you can choose compassion? Where in your life can you practice compassion? Where in your life can you practice compassion? Where in your relationships can you practice compassion? Where in your home can you practice compassion? Think about situations, and that requires us, as you know, to stay in the moment, requires us to be mindful, requires us to be present. But where can you practice compassion? And asking yourself that question, and then being in that place and space where you can open up and practice compassion. Where can I practice compassion today? And we don't have to try to figure out how to do it. That's what will be revealed to us once we determine the what, as I always say. Once we determine the what is practicing compassion. The what is looking for where I can practice it. And then once it's determined where it is that you can practice compassion, and you can find it in almost every moment of every day. You can find the where almost every moment of every day. And when we are in that place of looking at where we can practice compassion, then it would be revealed to us how. It would be revealed to us how it can be done. It would be revealed to us what's needed in this moment. What's needed in this moment to alleviate the suffering of this person I'm dealing with. What's needed in this moment to alleviate the suffering of this group? What's needed in this moment for me? What can I do in this moment? Right now, what's needed in this moment? Can I practice compassion right here and right now? That's the question. And looking around at where you can practice compassion, and then choosing to practice compassion, because compassion is a choice. We have a choice. We always have a choice to either blame or judge or shame or do nothing, or to practice compassion, to open our hearts and to really try to do what we can to alleviate the suffering, do what we can to make the connection, because as humans, as people, this is what we all need. We all need connection. We all need connection of some kind. And so what can I do in this moment to connect? And then choose to do that. There are studies that say that compassion is contagious, that when we see other people practicing compassion, it makes us more compassionate. And the more we see compassion being practiced, the more we practice it. When we see people making donations and contributions to war-torn areas or to places, as I said, with natural disasters, or places that are really in need, then more and more people will give, more and more people make donations, more and more people will reach out to help. But that's because compassion is contagious. It is contagious. Think about how sometimes that those random acts of kindness, when someone pays for, is in the Starbucks line and they pay for the car behind them. And then they found that more and more and more people, that happens more and more and more. When someone has paid for me, then I pay for the car behind me, and then the car behind me pays for the car behind them. And it's like a snowball effect. It's like a snowball effect. So it has a contagious effect. And that's what we want, isn't it, in this world? When we think about this world today and how much division there is and how much separateness there is and how many things that are going on that are so unloving. So when we think about those kinds of things, what we need most is to have open hearts. What we need most is to have connection. What we need most is to realize and recognize that we are all a part of the one. We are all a part of the one. And as we look around the world today and all the things that are going on, and particularly when we think about how close it appears that serious war is at hand. When we think about that, it brings to mind what Martin Luther King said, that we can learn to live together as brothers or die together as fools. And that's really true. We can learn to live together as brothers, or perish together. That's the word he used, or perish together as fools. And that's what compassion does. That's what connection does. That's what caring does. It helps us to learn to live together. Because if we don't all live together, then what's the other option? What's the other option? And so the important thing is for us to recognize in our own individual lives, to recognize the importance of open-heartedness, the importance of reaching out, the importance of practicing connection in our own individual lives. And then once we look at the places where we can practice compassion, then choose that. Then choose that. Choose to practice compassion. Choose to let the judgment go. Choose to let the impatience go. Choose to let the blame go. Choose to let the shame go if you're not practicing self-compassion. Choose that. And once we choose that, then practice it. Practice it. I like the term that Bishop Tutu used, being a God carrier. I'm going to invite you to choose to be a God carrier. Choose to be a God carrier. And what does a God carrier do? How does a God carrier act? How does a God carrier show up in the world? How does a God carrier relate to other God carriers? Because if we're God carriers, because we are made in the image and likeness and out of pure spirit, then everybody else is. Everybody else is. And so choosing to be a God carrier and to recognize that everyone is. To recognize that everyone is. And so how do God carriers interact with each other? And if it's not consistent with the way you're interacting right now, then you can make a different choice. You can make a different choice. That's what connects, that's what compassion does, that's what caring does. And so I am inviting us all today to really recognize the compassion, connection in everything we do, everywhere we go, every person we meet, every situation we find ourselves in, every conversation we find ourselves in, everything has a connection to compassion. It has a connection to wanting to relieve suffering. And what we have to do is to expand our definition of suffering. Expand our definition of suffering. Expand our definition of suffering and recognizing that when someone is really acting out, it's a cry out for love. When someone is really doing something untoward, there's some suffering underneath that. How can I relieve that? It may be with just a word of kindness. It may be with just a smile. It may be with a kind thought of if it's someone that you're not physically present with. It may be a prayer. It may be a prayer. It may be a prayer, just a silent prayer that we have for someone else. That may be the way that we are seeking to alleviate the suffering. It may be a blessing. It may be a blessing. Bishop Tutu says that when his doorbell would ring, he would make the sign of the cross over the person at the door without even knowing who it was, just as a way of blessing them. Just as a way of blessing them before even going to the door. How awesome is that? If someone crosses your mind, just praying for them, or sending a blessing to them, or sending a good thought to them. That's a way of practicing compassion, and that's a way of really being a God carrier and recognizing that God carrier in the other person, and knowing that there are God carriers everywhere we go, everywhere we look. Everywhere we go, everywhere we look, there's a God carrier. So I'm inviting you to be a God carrier consciously. Set your intention this week to be that, and then to act like that too. Act like you are in everything you do and everywhere you go. And so let's just take a deep breath together as we just get ready to turn in for prayer, and just turn within for prayer, and just know that compassion is what we're hardwired for. We're hardwired for compassion. And it comes from our heart space. And that as we keep our heart space open, we're able to practice it more and more and more. And that's how we get into that unified field of oneness. That's how we stay in that unified field of oneness, because we recognize that we are all one. We're all one. We're all one. Let's take a breath as we turn within. And so just taking a breath and turning within in this moment, just recognizing that one power, that one presence, that one mind, that one life, that one essence, that one intelligence, that one that I choose to call God, that one that is everywhere present, that one that lives and moves and has its being in me. And I live and move and have my being in that one that is my very life. It is the life and the source of us all. Just recognizing this one and just knowing that this one is that from which we can never be separate. It is that from which we can never be separate, no matter what. It is that from which we can never depart, no matter what. And it never departs from us because we are part of that one. How awesome it is to know this truth. And so from this place of awareness, from this place of truth, I speak the word of wholeness for us this day. Just now knowing that contained within this wholeness is compassion. It's compassion. It is that open-heartedness. It is that love, that peace, that joy, that harmony. It's all the gifts of the Spirit are contained within this wholeness that is a result of being at one with the one. And so I know that each of us gets to experience wholeness in our lives, whether it's in our body temples. I'm knowing that every organ, cell, tissue, function of everybody is filled with that radiant healing presence of God. I know that all needs are met for each and every person, anywhere and everywhere. I know that there's comfort and there's peace of mind where that is needed. I know that there's abundance and prosperity. There's enough. There's enough for everyone. There's a releasing of lack and releasing of limitation, a releasing of fear, a releasing of doubt. And there's a coming into that place of knowing, that place of truth where all needs are met, where God is everywhere present in the midst of every situation, in the midst of every circumstance, just knowing that God is, and just being open to knowing that God is, and then acting from that place of knowing that God is. And so I just pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer this day. You may speak their name silently or aloud, but you may speak them now. So for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I know that God is in the midst of everything that's going on. God is right where each person is, blessing and keeping them right here and right now. This prayer goes out to anyone needing a prayer this day, any place, in war-torn areas, in disaster areas, anywhere that there's prayer needed. God is in the midst of everything, every situation, every event, every circumstance. This prayer always goes out to our government officials, knowing that right where each one is, God is, and there are open hearts and open minds. Open hearts and open minds that are willing to work for the good of all concerned, willing to serve for the good of all concerned, recognizing that there is unity everywhere. And so I just simply, in this moment, just give thanks. Give thanks for the word spoken, give thanks for the perfect manifestation of this word spoken, give thanks for everything, Just recognizing that God is and giving thanks that God is. I know indeed that all is well, for I know indeed that all is God. And I simply allow it to be. And so it is.